Well, good morning. My name is Nate. If we don't know each other, I'd love to meet you at some point. I grew up in Tennessee, and close to Tennessee, about an hour from where I grew up, is Mammoth Cave National Park. And Mammoth Cave is the world's longest cave that we've discovered. It's pretty cool, and so being close to there, took lots of field trips there as a kid, and also a couple of family trips. But the first time I went, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and they lead you down into this central place in the cave, and the guide of the tour has all of the lights turned off, and he has you sit there for several minutes. And I remember as a 7 or 8 year old being kind of freaked out by it, because it's very disorienting. To be in pitch darkness like that for an extended period of time, you start to lose your sense of space and direction, and you start to you start to lose track of time, even in your sense of how much time has passed. It's a very disorienting thing. And I wonder if you've experienced something like that. But those kinds of experiences help us remember that life is meant to be lived in the light. Life is meant to be lived in the light. And darkness can have devastating effects on us. There's this, Ernest Shackleton was an explorer and led many expeditions to Antarctica and towards the South Pole. And in one of his expeditions, he was trying to become the first team to ever cross the South Pole on land. And there's a book about their exploration by Alfred Lansing. And in the book, he writes this: "In all the world, there is no desolation more complete than the polar night. Only those who have experienced it can fully appreciate what it means to be without the sun day after day and week after week." Listen to this. "Few men unaccustomed to it can fight off its effects altogether, and it has driven some men mad." Prolonged darkness can drive people mad. You can go crazy from living in the darkness for a prolonged period of time. Now, here's why we're talking about that. Is because what's true physically is also true spiritually. This is not just a physical reality. This is also a spiritual reality. The Bible describes God as light, and in him there is no darkness. But the world has turned away from God in our arrogance and our foolishness, and that has created a world marked by darkness. God, in his kindness, is coming towards us to bring us back into the light, and that's what the book of Ephesians has been about. God is doing something for people in darkness so that they can be rescued and so that they can be transformed. And as people who are transformed, rescued and transformed, we are meant to live in light. That's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to see the power that this can have. So would you open a Bible with me to Ephesians chapter 5. This is on page 1038 in the Bible in the seat there if you want to use that particular Bible. If you're new to the Bible, the big numbers are called chapters and the small numbers are called verses. So Ephesians chapter 5, we're going to start in verse 6. But we're walking through this book called Ephesians together. This is a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to churches in the ancient city of Ephesus during the first century. And as we're walking through the book, we've come to a section where he's talking about how the church is meant to live in a way that shows the world what God is like. And in today's passage, he talks about that with the images of darkness and light. And if we are going to live as people who experience God and who help the world see God, then we need to do two things he's going to show us. And here's the two things. First, we need to understand the light. We need to understand the darkness. We do need to understand the light too, but that's point two. We need to understand the darkness, that is, where it leads and what it is, and we need to follow the light. So let's talk about it. First, we need to understand the darkness. Where does darkness lead? Before we even talk about what it is, let's talk about what's at stake. That's where Paul starts. What's at stake? What's at the bottom of this dark hole? What's in this dark cave? Where does it lead? And it leads to two places, Paul tells us in this passage. The first is it leads to emptiness, fruitlessness. Look at verse 11. Don't participate in the fruitless works of darkness. To be fruitless means to do a bunch of work and then have nothing to show for it. To be fruitless means that nothing good, beautiful, and true is produced from the deeds of darkness, the way of darkness. The path of darkness is deceitful. It will often start by promising you that there's something really awesome. There's life to be had here, but in reality, it only leads to death. So that's why you need to consider carefully what darkness is, because it will destroy you. It will lead to emptiness. Has this been true in your life? As you look back on the seasons of your life where you feel the most embarrassed or the most ashamed, you have the biggest regrets. When you look back, isn't it true that the things you were doing are things that now you would just describe as dark? It was a season of darkness. And maybe even at the time it didn't feel that way. You would have even argued otherwise. But now, in light of what you know now, it was just dark. That's where darkness leads. It leads to emptiness, to fruitlessness. So we should be sobered as we consider what darkness is. But the other place that darkness leads is even more devastating. Paul describes it in verse 6. Let no one deceive you with empty arguments, for God's wrath is coming on the disobedient because of these things. Where darkness leads is to God's wrath. God's wrath refers to his good and righteous anger that he has for evil, for sin. The reason that God has wrath is because God is loving and God is good. He's just. And people who really love and people who are really marked by goodness are angered by things that will hurt and destroy the ones that they love and will hurt and destroy goodness. And so God has wrath because of his love and his goodness. And God's wrath, it says, is coming. There's a sense in which God's wrath is present now. God's wrath is poured out now as people reap the consequences of sin. As we reap the consequences of sin in our lives and we see sin's devastating effects in the world, this is a present form of God's wrath. But there is also a future day of wrath coming. This refers to God's judgment at the end of the age when God will judge once and for all the deeds of darkness and the people of darkness. So Paul wants us to be sober-minded as we consider the darkness. Talking about light versus darkness is not just some cute thing. It's not just a cartoon for kids or something. It's not silly. It's not something to joke about. It's serious. Your very life hangs in the balance. Your life is at stake. So Paul wants us to be sober-minded as we consider the darkness and as we follow the light. So, as we understand the darkness, now we see where it leads. It leads to emptiness and it leads to God's judgment, his wrath. Now let's talk about what it is. And as we talk about this, the purpose is not simply to just understand, now we know what darkness is. The purpose is for us to be able to evaluate our lives. Are we walking in darkness? Would we be sober-minded to evaluate our lives and consider that, because we know where darkness leads now? So would you consider your life? What is darkness? Paul shows us three things about darkness here in this passage. First, at the most basic fundamental level, darkness is something that you do. It's disobedience. Paul says in verse 6, God's wrath is coming on the disobedient because of these things. He says in verse 11, don't participate in the fruitless works of darkness. Darkness is something that you do. It's an action. It's disobedience to God. That means it's doing what God says not to do, and it's not doing what he says to do. And in this passage, Paul lists several examples of what darkness looks like in real life. Beginning in chapter 4, verse 25, he starts making this list of practices. And these are the things that he describes as darkness. So let's take a look at them. As we do, here's what's so sad and difficult about this list is so many things on this list have just become normal for us. It's just part of how things go in our world. It's what we expect. And because of that, we could be personally participating in darkness, and it just feel normal to us. So, would you consider your life as we go through this list? First, verse 25, Paul says, put away lying and speak to the truth, each one to his neighbor. Lying is darkness, he says. In our culture, we don't trust the media or politicians or even official statements that entities make or that people make because we've come to expect dishonesty. And as much as we could complain about that culturally, it's much better to examine our own life. Are there any relationships where you are failing to be honest? The next example Paul gives of the way of darkness is losing control of your anger. Chapter 4, verse 26. Be angry and do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. He also says that having bitterness and hatred in your heart towards others is the way of darkness. Verse 31. Let all bitterness, anger, and wrath, shouting and slander be removed from you, along with all malice. Rage, grudge holding, tribalism, canceling people, this is normal in our world. Slander and malice, this is the only political discourse that we even have anymore. But it's not right. It's dark. Do you need to apologize and make things right with anyone because of how you have lost control of your anger? On the other hand, is there anyone that you need to forgive? Paul describes darkness as stealing. Verse 28, let the thief no longer steal. Instead, he is to do honest work with his own hands. He describes greed in chapter 5, verse 3, and chapter 5, verse 5. Stealing, greed, these are the ways of darkness. We have to have two-factor authentication for most everything. We have to lock our doors. The only reason most of us even know what catalytic converters are is because we've come to expect that people are going to steal from us. But would you examine your life? Is there anything that you've taken that doesn't belong to you? This next one that Paul mentions seems like something so childish, like we should be talking to the second graders about this, but we're adults. It's okay for us. He says, chapter 4, verse 29, no foul language should come from your mouth, but only what is good for building up someone in need so that it gives grace to those who hear. He says in chapter 5, verse 4, obscene and foolish talking or crude joking are not suitable, but rather giving thanks. One journalist that I read this week said, in our cultural moment, anything can be a joke or a troll if it advances some greater political objective. Anything is allowed to be joked about as long as it advances your cause. But Christians believe that there are some things which are so dishonoring to God and so dishonoring to fellow humans that they shouldn't even be joked about. There are some jokes that are off limits. But to even say this sets you up for criticism. Because to say there are some things we shouldn't joke about is to say, can you just lighten up? Really? You just didn't understand. You don't, see, in the context, if you knew more about this situation, then you would know that this is perfectly fine and normal kind of thing to joke about. It was only a joke. Can you just relax? But Christians are called to ask, but is it even something that should be joked about? Have you been speaking disrespectfully to anyone or about anyone? Is what you say and what you laugh about honoring to God and others? And the final thing on Paul's list is sexual immorality. Chapter 5, verse 3. But sexual immorality and any impurity or greed should not even be heard of among you, as is proper for saints. Verse 5, for no one recognized this. Every sexually immoral or impure or greedy person who is an idolater does not have an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Sexual immorality is a deed of darkness. God is not against sex. God is the one who created sex and gave us sex as a gift. It's actually a fascinating thing to think about. But the reason that God cares about our sexuality is because he wants us to flourish, and he wants to spare our own lives and our relationships and our society from serious harm. And this is why he gives clear boundaries for sex. Sex is only to be practiced within marriage between one man and one woman. Anything outside of this is sexual immorality. It's participating in a deed of darkness. So it's a deed of darkness to have sex with someone who isn't your spouse. It's a deed of darkness to have sex with someone of the same gender. It's a deed of darkness to fantasize about sex with someone who isn't your spouse. When you zoom out and you look at this list of deeds of darkness that Paul has given, it is clear that God has created us to be people of truth, of goodness, of love, of nobility, even of joy, even. And to disobey him is to walk in darkness. It's to set yourself up for emptiness, and it's eventually to lead you to God's wrath. But now, Paul takes us one layer deeper into the darkness of the cave. And he shows us that darkness is not just what you do. It's also something underneath that. Darkness is what you love. We call this idolatry. This is why he says in verse 5, for no one recognized this, every sexually immoral or impure or greedy person, and then he takes it a layer deeper, who is an idolater. See, this is actually the heart issue. An idol is anything that takes the place of God. So idolatry is anything that you love or trust or depend on more than God. In other words, what's underneath disobedience, what's underneath your actions are your loves. And idolatry is when you love something instead of God. You love something in the place of God. And do you see what this means? If darkness is deeper than disobedience, if it's possible to be walking in darkness because of what's going on in your heart underneath your actions, then here's what that means. It's possible to be walking in darkness even while you are obeying God. And so if we are doing a sober assessment of our lives to determine, are we walking in darkness? Because darkness has devastating consequences. As we examine our lives, it's not just enough to look at what we're doing and what people would say about us from looking on the outside of us, but we actually need to go a layer deeper and examine our hearts, because it's possible to be obeying God and still be walking in darkness. This is what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. He said prayer can be sinful if it's done to look impressive to others rather than to humbly seek God. Giving to charity or making big donations can be sinful if it's done to gain praise from others. Prayer, giving, can be deeds of darkness because of what's going on in your heart. This must mean then also that parenting and hard work and even preaching and serving in ministry can be a deed of darkness. It's possible to be doing many good things, but be doing them without love for God or a desire to be with God. And these two deserve God's wrath. Now, how is that good or just? I mean, maybe you've thought this before. It would make sense, okay, there are some people in the world who are so, evil, and they've done so many harmful, evil things. We could understand God holding those people responsible and God pouring out his wrath on some of those people. But many, many, many people are decent. And they're not perfect, but they're decent. They've not done that kind of stuff. And they deserve God's wrath just because they haven't loved him enough or worshiped him enough or always had the best motivation or something. How is that good? How is that right? I think that's an important question to consider. Tim Keller has this illustration that has helped me think about this. I want to share it with you. He says, imagine there's a struggling single mother. She does her best to provide for her son. She works multiple jobs to try and provide for him, care for him. She always teaches him. She does her best to teach her son to tell the truth, to work hard, to share with others. She's emotionally mature and present and nurturing. And as the boy grows up, she continues to work. She ends up working multiple jobs to put the son through college. He gets through college. He gets his degree. He graduates. And he lives a moral life. He tells the truth like he was taught. He works hard like he was taught. And he tries to look out for others just like his mom taught him. But he never calls his mom. He won't talk to her anymore. Instead, he refuses to call, refuses to visit. After the boy grows up and does that, is he right? Is he honorable? Or would he be guilty of something? But he would say, I'm doing everything that she told me to do. I'm being honest, I'm working hard, taking care of others. So what's the big deal? Isn't that enough? I'm doing all that she requires. What would you say to him? You would say, no, of course not. That's not enough. No, that's not honoring. That's not right. It's not just. It's not acceptable simply to live a good life and ignore a relationship with someone who has loved you so much. And if there is a God and you say, I don't worship God, but I'm a good person, isn't that enough? The answer is no. It is not enough. Darkness is not just what you do. It is what's underneath what you do. It's your heart. It's what you love. So here are some questions to examine. Is there any disordered love in you? When you're angry or anxious, what are you afraid of losing or not getting? What are you telling yourself? If I don't have this, I won't be okay. When things fall apart, where do you go for comfort or escape? The reality is you can be doing all of the right things and still have a heart underneath that rejects God. So do you see what Paul is showing us? Darkness is not just something you do, it's also something that you love, and now he's going to take it even a step further underneath into the dark tunnel. And he's going to say that darkness is also something that you are. It's your identity. So often, we underestimate the depth of the darkness that is inside of us. Instead, we think that deep down, our true self is innocent. If you could drill down deep enough, the true self that's in me is light. We've only been corrupted because of disappointments and wrongs that we've experienced. But deep down, like Luke says of Darth Vader, there is still good in him. But the Christian faith tells a different story. Deep down, though we are beautifully and wonderfully made, we are also all deeply flawed because of sin. There is goodness in us. Absolutely. There is so much goodness in us. We are created in the image of God. Of course, there's goodness in us. But there's also darkness in us. And our tendency is to resist this. Some people think this sounds far too negative. Instead, we want to say something like, even though I'm not perfect, I'm not dark on the inside. On the whole, I'm a good person who messes up sometimes. I'm not a liar. I just lie sometimes. I'm not a glutton. I just don't always practice self-control. I'm not bitter and controlling. I just can't let things go until I get my way. I'm not a greedy person. I just give very little. I'm not a dark person. I just do dark things sometimes. But this is not what Jesus teaches. Jesus says that what comes out of us reflects what's in us. In Matthew chapter 15, verse 19, Jesus is speaking and he says, "For from the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, sexual immoralities, thefts, false testimonies, slander." These things come from the heart. They are in us because there's actually part of us that is dark. Paul is wanting us to see the darkness clearly. He wants us to understand the darkness because the stakes are so high. Darkness is something you do. It's also something you love. It's also something you are. And do not be deceived, he says. Verse 6. Let no one deceive you with empty arguments, for God's wrath is coming on the disobedient because of these things. If you want to escape the darkness, because it goes so deep in you, there must be a light from the outside that would come and rescue you. There must be a light from outside that would come and transform you. Oh, and that's the good news of Christianity. God, who is light. In him there is no darkness. When he sees the world that we are in, the dark world, what does he do? He sends his son. God from God, light from light, to rescue us and bring us out. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned on the people living in a land of darkness. Jesus is the true light that gives light to everyone who came into the world. Jesus, the true light, descends into darkness to save us. This is the heart of Christianity. And the way that he descended into darkness is first by taking on flesh. He comes and he lives as a man. And when he came as a man, he continued to humble himself and descend further and further into darkness until, as Paul said in Ephesians chapter 4, he descended to the very lowest parts. even though he is light, and he always walked in the light, and he always obeyed God, and he always had a heart that was pure before God, and he only had light in him, Jesus, though he was light, descended to darkness and went to a cross. What was he doing at the cross? He was taking darkness on himself. He was going to the very end of where darkness leads, to emptiness, forsakenness, and God's wrath, judgment for sin. And Jesus, the true light, who gives light to everyone, came into the world in order to go to a cross and die in the place of sinners. Jesus descended into darkness so that we could be brought out and have light. And Jesus did not stay in the darkness when he died on the cross. Instead, he came to life, and he stepped into a marvelous light and offers marvelous light to anyone who will come with him, who will trust in him, who will turn from the darkness, leave the darkness behind, and trust in him. This is what Jesus offers to us, is new light. This is the heart of Christianity. This is what Ephesians 1-3 is about. And Jesus, who resurrected in glorious light, ascended to the Father, and someday he will return to the earth. And when he returns, he will judge the living and the dead, so that all evildoers will be judged and cast into a darkness that knows no end. But he is coming to build a new world, a new city. And in that city, there will be no need for the sun, and there will be no need for lamps, because he himself will be our light. This is the story of the Christian faith. So, the question for you, if you are aware of your darkness, is, are you going to come with Jesus? Are you going to follow the light? To follow Jesus means to turn from the darkness and be exposed for who you really are, a sinner. On the surface, to come into the light is scary. Many people reject the light because their deeds are evil and they don't want to be exposed. But because of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done, by dying on a cross and being raised from the dead, you can come into the light with confidence and courage. You do not have to be embarrassed or ashamed, because Jesus' intention is not to embarrass you or to make you ashamed or to condemn you. He is not calling you into the light so he can make you feel worse about yourself. He's calling you into the light so that you can be rescued from the darkness, and so that you can become light, and so that you can live in his marvelous light. So will you come? That is the question that makes someone a Christian. Are you going to come? Leave the darkness behind. Trust in Jesus Christ, the true light. If you come to Jesus, Paul says, then you, who were once darkness, verse 8, are now light in the Lord. So walk as children of light. Oh, you've been born again. You're a child now. So walk as children of light. Do not become partners with the darkness. That is, don't participate in the deeds of darkness. Those are fruitless. They are not going to produce anything good and righteous and true. But if you will walk in this new way, if you will walk in the light as he himself is in the light, then you will bear fruit of all kinds of goodness and righteousness and truth, he says. This is our calling as Christians, to walk in the light as children of light, because this is what Christ has accomplished for us. He's rescued us out of darkness and brought us into light, and he has transformed us from darkness to light. And so we walk as children of light. As we walk in the light, here's what the light can accomplish. First, it can expose the darkness. That is, it can help people who are living in darkness see, wait a minute, this is a fruitless way of living. There must be something better. There must be something more. And so in that sense, it can expose, wait a minute, I'm in the dark, but it can also transform. When we walk as children of light, we can expose the darkness. We can also transform darkness into light. This is what's captured in verses 13 and 14. It's a difficult phrase to translate. This translation, it tries its best. But it says, everything exposed by the light is made visible. Verse 14, for what makes everything visible is light. The idea in verses 13 and 14 is literally that the stuff that's exposed by the light becomes light. So if you read more literal translations, you get that nuance a little bit more. Here's the idea that Paul is getting at. One commentator summarizes it like this: it is even possible for light to turn the thing it shines upon into light also. After all, this is what happened to you. Isn't that what happened to you? If you're a Christian, Jesus Christ, he shined on you. And you actually became the light too. You became light. You were once darkness, but now you're light in the Lord. This is why Jesus teaches in Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you are the light of the world. And wait a minute, I thought Jesus was the light of the world. Yeah. But isn't this the message of Ephesians? That we have been united with Jesus by faith so that what's true about Jesus becomes true about us, so that what's his becomes ours. That's what union with Christ is. And so Jesus is the light, and so we become light. Jesus lives, so we live. Jesus is the light, so we become light. So Jesus says, you are the light of the world. Now, a city that's up on a hill is not hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket, but instead on a lampstand so it can give light to everybody who's in the house. Verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. This is the same thing that Paul is teaching here. As people who have been rescued from darkness and brought into marvelous light, as people who have been transferred from a domain of darkness into a kingdom of light, we are to walk in the light. We are to be people of light so that we can show the world a better way to live and transform the world. Oh, man, isn't this what you want to be a part of? This is who the church is meant to be. In order to be this way, in order to be the light of the world, we have to be different from the world, and we've got to be present in the world. We have to be different from the world if we're going to have any transforming effect. We've got to be people of truth and honesty, self-control, righteous anger. We've got to be people of generosity and responsible hard work. We've got to be courteous and respectful and encouraging in our speech. We've got to be merciful and forgiving of people, sexually pure in our words and in our actions, because we are light in the Lord. So let's walk in the light. Let's follow the light. We've got to be distinct from the world, and we've also got to be present in the world. This is the idea Jesus is getting at in the Sermon on the Mount. You don't turn into a light so you can cover it up. You've got to shine. The purpose of light is to shine. And so the church is not to retreat from the darkness. The church is to be present in the darkness, yet distinct from it, living as light, but present. And so this is who the church is called to be. We are to go into everyday places like soccer games and coffee shops and grocery stores and workplaces and classrooms and courtrooms in order to be light. We're to go to hard places like prisons and hospitals and homeless shelters and soup kitchens and rehab facilities to be light. And we're to go to distant places like Poland and Zambia and Cyprus and Tajikistan and Japan and Colombia and Honduras in order to be light. This is the calling that we've received from God, to help the world meet God. So we've got to be imitators of him, children of light. So let's walk in the light. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we praise you for sending your Son. We ask that you would help us to get up, to awake from our sleep, to rise from death to life as Christ shines on us. God, would that be something that accurately describes our church? Would that be something that accurately describes each one of us? People who are awake to you and to your plans for the world. Would we test what is pleasing to you and walk in the light? It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.